Hello, everyone. My name is Natalya Alas, aka Orphic Astrology. Some of you may know me as Naji or NM or Nati. I am a professional consulting astromancer specializing in Hellenistic through medieval Persianate techniques. I also have extensive study in fertility astrology with Nicola Smuts-Alsop and Jen Zard, and I am a parent. So, this topic I'm about to introduce, a series of conversations around astrology for parenting, came up over a year ago over the realization that there is a lack of dialogue or resources for parents who are astrologers or astrology enthusiasts. So, I decided to connect with some of my fellow colleagues that are also parents to engage in some conversations around this topic. So I'd like to introduce my first guest and co-host, the amazing practitioner, a friend and fellow colleague, Catherine Yeager. Thank you for joining me.
Oh,
Hi.
thank you so much for such a wonderful, warm welcome. It's so great to be here and to be connecting on this topic, which I feel very passionate about. And when you came up with this idea and approached me, I was very excited to be able to be a part of the conversation. I
Yeah.
also am a professional practicing astrologer. I specialize in Renaissance medieval natal astrology as well as predictive astrology. I'm also a Uranian astrologer, and so I do specialize in midpoints, in Uranian astrology, cosmobiology, and I'm also a big seeker, and I've gotten certified and studied with you as well, the lunar mansions, as well as stellar stars and astro magic. Really excited to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. There's so many astrologers who are parents that I want to include in this conversation, hope to bring on over the course um, of the series. But since we've exchanged and shared so many experiences together, I figured, oh, like this will be a really great start. And you're someone that's really great to converse with. So I'm really happy that we're getting to do this. And we wanted to start with kind of like the
Mhm.
fundamental questions around astrology for parenting, and that's around ethics. I think a lot of times, ethical questions aren't necessarily addressed. We don't really see this in conversation, like on social media, in the astrology scene. It's definitely in the area for aspiring professional astrologers. This is like a very
Mm.
serious topic for us, right? But oftentimes it gets overlooked. And so wanted to just kind of like address some of those questions around ethics and even just concerns that parents have around astrology. So, what are ethics? Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines ethics, one, as a set of moral principles, a theory or system of moral values. B, the principles of conduct governing an individual or a group. C, a consciousness of moral importance. D, a guiding philosophy. Two, a set of moral issues or aspects such as rightness. Three, the discipline dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation, such as the philosophy of ethics. And ethics is a term that is used interchangeably often with morals. But the term morals often describes one's particular values concerning what is right and what is wrong, while ethics can refer more broadly to moral principles, and one often sees it applied to questions of correct behavior within a relatively narrow area of conduct or activity. And as professional astrologers, we have a code of ethics. So all of the major organizations, OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology, has its ethical guidelines. The NCGR has a code of ethics. APAI has a code of ethics. ISAR has its ethical standards and guidelines. I will link these organizations to their codes and their guidelines along with this podcast episode. And what they all have in common is basically the professional astrologer has a responsibility to the client to never do harm. We must always act in the best interest of the client and avoid making statements that can cause harm through confusion, misunderstanding, or fear. And there is a responsibility of maintaining confidentiality and objectivity, being open to diversity and practicing inclusivity, respecting sexual, financial, and other personal boundaries. So clients must not be exploited in any way, including through sexual, romantic, or financial situations. Um, Another important thing is honoring the integrity of the services offered. So terms and conditions of the consultations are clearly stated and understood by the client prior to the appointment. And finally, and probably the most important, especially concerning this topic, is avoiding fatalistic statements, because as professional astrologers, we take full responsibility for the information imparted to the client. So, in that vein, no astrological reading or divination can promise 100% accuracy. So, making fatalistic statements is a no go. Um, all of this is really important when parents often have these questions around astrology and their children. I've seen people who become really obsessed over their child's nativity, um, and they'll either become concerned over certain placements um, or expect a lot more of their child because of the astrology. So some of the questions parents may ask, which will hopefully cover in this conversation and at least inspire some thinking around it and open up the dialogue amongst each other, is when should I get a reading for my child? How early is too early is a common question. So we'll explore the history of horoscopic astrology for that. Who do I trust with reading my child's astrological birth chart? And so we'll cover some green flags and red flags of trustworthy and knowledgeable astrologers. Should I be concerned if my child is born with such and such configuration? This is probably like one of the most common questions that parents have. So we'll talk about that. And how do I prevent negative events foreseen in the nativity? How can I maximize my parenting skills with the awareness of my child or children's astrology? And when do I allow my child to know what's in their natal chart? How early can I introduce my child or children to astrology? And how do I introduce my child or children to astrology? So, a lot of these questions come from our unconscious or conscious awareness of our own personal morals and values and our own ethics. So it's up to the astrologer to maintain integrity around their own ethics and around the ethical guidelines as defined by our organizations. Mhm.
And I would also say too, especially if we hone in on the specific topic of parenting, a lot of people's morals or code of ethics, we don't actually have a broad code of ethics on parenting, Um,
Yeah.
and there's when you become a parent, you enter into, and you're a parent who wants to be active and wants to be on the forefront of kind of what is best for my child, because that is at the end of the day what the ethics are leading to. What is going to be best for my child? Because astrology transcends just the physical. We're talking about my child as a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual entity. Do you know that, and when we begin to think about the ethics around parenting, how do we discipline? How do we teach emotional management? How do we do any of these different types of things? So something you and I had spoken about was this need too, that when you're starting to look into, think about what your ethics as a parent are, and also too, maybe it's time to get a real look at your own chart. You know what I mean? And I
Mhm.
even as a professional astrologer, I have a hard time looking at my own chart because it's like I can't read the label when I'm inside of the jar, you know? So I need the other, like you, the professional astrologer, to help me out, to help me see, because parenting is such a deep excavation of those parts of yourself that might be traumatized, that might need emotional management, that might need to be understood on a different level. Your child is, in my opinion, and I am no expert, but in my opinion, is one of the great teachers, you know? So we want the astrological reading of that child's chart and of your chart to help support that, you know? And I think that's something we can all kind of universally, hopefully, agree upon, you know, when we're approaching something like having the chart be read.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we definitely have our blind spots, right, when it comes to looking at our own nativities or natal charts. And in that sense, we can have blind spots around our own children's charts, right? Uh, Parents tend to, want the best for their child, and so with that comes a lot of fear and concern or trepidation around, certain things. So yeah, there's like a number of questions. Like we kind of like isolated some questions that parents may typically ask, and we hope to answer these in this conversation, or at least start to open up the conversation around them, such as, when should I get a reading for my child's nativity? How early is too early? Who do I trust with reading my child's astrological birth chart? Should I be concerned if my child is born with such and such configuration? I think that's like a really common one.
That's a big one. Yep, we all have stayed up late at night, you know, mourning over our child's chart, you know, or, you know, being like, yay to this thing too, right? Because it goes both ways,
Yeah.
right? It goes both ways.
hmm Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we can definitely talk about the more auspicious versus like the configurations of our beloved Mars and Saturn
Oh,
players.
I just
Um,
love to pile up in the 12th house. That's always fun. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
we can definitely get into into that. And how do I prevent negative events foreseen in the nativity is tied to that, right? How can I maximize my parenting skills with the awareness of my child or children's astrology? When do I allow my child to know what's in their natal chart? How early can I introduce my child or children to astrology? And how do I introduce my child or children to astrology? So
Love it. Yes.
these were some of like the most, common or pertinent questions that I think as parents can take up a lot of our time. And
No doubt.
yeah, yeah. So I think a good place to start is the idea that like I've come across some astrologers, like in saying that in some parts of the Jyotish tradition, not everybody, but some say that, I mean, you get your chart read, but at the same time, it's like very much considered that your child's like a part of the birthing parent or the
Mhm.
mother,
Mhm.
for the first 3 years, and so
Mhm.
the astrology pertaining to the mother in those first 3 years is gonna outweigh the astrology of the child, right? So there's that that theory or that consideration to keep in mind, and then the reality that astrology was studied to understand. We have the ancient omens, or ancient sky scrying to understand what the stars the gods are trying to tell us and foretell.
Mm,
And then that developed into horoscopic astrology, which horoscopic astrology is casting the child's nativity. And I think for a
mhm.
long time, it was very much part of uh, the culture, regardless of, or it's very much part of society to, especially if you have the means. There's that whole other debate, but most people would want to understand, the life at hand, that this child that they, or this newborn life that they just gave. So like Ptolemy in Tetrabiblos, um, he says the question of the length of life must first be determined, for if the nativity is found to be deficient in this respect, the inquiry concerning other matters becomes superfluous. The places of the luminaries, the ascendant, and the malefic planets are to be considered, especially in the nativities of infants, to judge whether the child will survive the first years. End quote.
Pretty hardcore. I mean, that's some medieval, writing right there for you. And that's the thing that's so fantastic about the medieval writing. It's like you're going to feel the doom no matter what. But,
Well,
I
that's
mean,
actually in the Hellenistic era,
oh,
so
Hellenistic, sorry.
pre medieval, but it informed the medieval.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And most of Ptolemy, not that we need to get too deep into that, is a ripoff. We all know that, but that's okay. We're all fine, right? We're all fine. But I mean that really is also too. He's basically saying, which is something that isn't a consideration for our modern times necessarily. Most of the time, women are considering that when they're looking at things around getting pregnant and around how that pregnancy is going to go in terms of fatality or non-fatality within the child, but he's definitely just sort of basically like, yep, let's see if the child's going to live or not. And if it's not, there's no use, which is so it's horrible, you know what I mean, to think and to hear. But I do think there is, in terms of reading the child's nativity, how early is too early. I, at first, was very much someone in the camp that I shouldn't look at that because of that side of the ethics where, you kind of say to yourself when you're approaching a chart, um, if you're ready to see everything bad in the chart, you're going to see everything bad. Boy, you're going to be able to pull it all out. But if you're ready to see everything good, then you're ready to see everything good. And this idea of projection onto the child, that was one of the biggest things for me around ethics, that and
Yeah.
as a mother, that, this idea of having these ideas being instilled in us and then projecting that onto the child. My child has Mars and Sagittarius right on the midheaven, and you would think that my child would be this runner, this, that. No, there's other things in the chart that temper this very much. It doesn't mean it's not going to come out, but if I push her into that Mars and Sagittarius before she's ready, or before, how do I even know exactly how it's going to express? So with that kind of projection onto the child is very difficult. But I do think that looking at early life, looking at third house stuff for the early childhood, looking at the fifth house of how they're going to have fun, looking at their Mercury, how might they express themselves, what might they really be into, looking at their moon. And Ptolemy kind of talks about that, or talks about that where we're not looking at the deep nuance necessarily. And you might feel differently than this, but we're not trying to look too nuanced, but let it be more of some of the generalized ideas of the placements. What do you think about that? Because that's usually when I approach where I enter, somewhere that is going to cause the least amount of projection and future harm, because we want the potential, the potential.
Yeah, I agree with you around being mindful of our projections. That's something that's very important to keep in mind. And it really, that's an area that as parents, we need to be reminded of, and to cultivate awareness around, where are we projecting. I think in general most people could definitely benefit from becoming more aware of their projections, right? But especially around this, it can be very problematic. And I think also, in our modern day practices, we tend to be admonished against predicting death, right? It can be a very taboo subject, and I think because when we're dealing with longevity and length of life, the technique of length of life, that is something that if you really don't have the experience or the 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 practice of it, or just like the skill and understanding and calculating that, if you miscalculate that, for example, you tell somebody, oh, your child's going to die in a month, like, and then what if they don't, or what if that puts some idea into their head that, so we don't do that. We
No.
tend to avoid doing all of that, and even avoid talking about the topic of death for already grown individuals, right? Um,
I
and
agree. And yeah, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, and I was just gonna say that I think it is a it's an interesting quote because it does put into context how um, you know ancient astrologers were emphasizing the importance of assessing a child's vitality at birth through the horoscope, and especially around rulers or royal families. They would be concerned
Mm,
about these areas, like to foresee, is the king going to be, you know risen up against, and even in the Roman era, there was a long period of time where astrologers were being persecuted because of the power to foresee those things, and then
mhm.
have people, have revolutionaries or rebels, counterinsurgents rise up against the emperors. So there's like massacres, like in the history, like massacres of astrologers. So like it's kind
Mhm.
of it's like the witch trauma that witches talk about, how you know we carry, or just like being persecuted, but then astrologers as well. And then I think in our modern day too, there is a sort of persecution. Maybe it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still there. And
There's definitely prejudice, very, very deep seated, and a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of
yeah,
closed-mindedness, like for sure. I mean,
yeah.
astrology, it's sad. We wait for astrology to hopefully take its rightful place back onto the world stage, and that's some of what Ptolemy was talking about. I mean, I think of astrology as that divinity of time. We're freezing those moments. I mean, why? Of course, the second that baby pops out, it's like, freeze it, let's see. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's go. And you can kind of go. And, I know the astrology podcast and Patrick Watson, they do a really interesting conversation around like astrologers with that kind of mindset of like, can we like actually freeze the moment? Now we have C-sections and all sorts of stuff. And
Mm.
we don't want to go off into the weeds there, right? Necessarily. But, it's one of those things that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So that was great.
It's all good. Mercury's still stationary, right?
I know, it was like boop, it's freaking gone. But one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking was that when we think about also coming from a magical perspective, and a
Hmm.
lot of magic, it's not all just intention, obviously, and motivation. There's so much more than just that. But that's a part of this ethical conversation as well, because a lot of times, oh, I was talking about astrology going onto the world stage. I would love for us to
Yeah.
have the day when we use astrology the way that they were using it. I tell people who come in for consultations, I studied these time periods because people were using them all day, every day. We're still learning, and there's so much that it can give. It's one
Hmm.
lens, but it's a very powerful and underutilized lens, and it can really give us a lot of information to help us with our child, and how their lives, helping their lives to unfold with the most potential. Again, I love that word potential as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
How to nurture that potential is definitely,
Absolutely, absolutely. And so when we look at things like, even if I'm doing a consultation for somebody who is, in a position where they really want to know when their time of death is going to be. Yes, I can do that. I can do it according to astrology. I can do the bibbly bip bop boop bop and I'll do it.
yeah,
But the thing is what is my motivation and what is the individual's motivation for asking the question, because that's the
yeah.
other thing. When we're approaching an astrologer about our child, it could be for a multitude of different reasons. And so we also want to take into consideration what that parent, what stage are they at? Are they at the sleep deprived stage? Like, 7 months in, I was at the sleep deprived, sleep deprivation is a form of torture for a reason. I couldn't think straight. And I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely, we have to meet the parents too where they are, because this is a very unique situation, this kind of family dynamics of parent to child.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's something that we were kind of touching upon before we started recording the conversation, is, how parents should definitely get their chart read first before getting their child's. And I think in most cases they will have already done that. There would have to be like some sort of like interest to propel them in that direction. The interest of getting their child's read most likely stems from the parents themselves having had their chart read before. So, but I would say that that is definitely like a prerequisite. And also kind of bringing back to the idea that the child, when first born, is really part of
Mm,
the birthing parent. And so um we're not really going to be tracking the transits to that nativity just yet, right? And maybe we would
mhm.
be looking more at the parents astrology, especially the first 3 years. And so that, what do you think about that? Because
I mean, what I think, I'd have to say, I think there's a lot of validity to it inside of the fact that I did not feel like I even began to reclaim my body and myself back until like 4 or 5 years of age. And,
yeah.
I mean, so I mean, that like, that definitely kind of tracks in, day-to-day existence of, having a young child. And
Yeah.
oh, and on cue, cute young child in the background. And so, but I would also say that I found um being able to have an objective backwards. So my daughter struggled with sleep, so
Mhm.
looking at sleep within her chart, looking
Mhm.
at my daughter had some sensory things, and
Mhm.
so that Venus South Node right there, and like that helped me understanding that a little bit more. Maybe not like projecting, being cautious, but in a way where I can say, you know what, I'm going to get some early childhood intervention before maybe some as other people might say, oh, you're being a little bit ridiculous. Nah, maybe not. You know what I'm saying? So, that kind of thing, and also tracking the moon.
Mhm.
Tracking the moon. I mean, wow. When I tracked my daughter's moon when she was young, it on point. And that's a tough
Mhm.
thing for me because I have a hard time. I don't even track my own moon. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I know my lunar returns, but like, and that's the other
Mhm.
thing. Those lunar returns, I think those are some of the most underutilized for children techniques.
Oh yeah, definitely. I know that in Mercury returns, I remember noticing my child's first year, because I would be, measuring her growth by those lunar returns. She's now a month old, 2 months old, and so
So cute.
yeah, and like they're so cute at that tender age, but they're spawning into these like gremlins.
Understatement, but yes.
Little terrors. And, but I love wildness. I love the wildness that children embody. The untamability of their natures. Like nobody can
Oh,
control them.
yes.
Nobody can tell them what to do. I'm all about that. But yeah, I remember noticing. So my daughter started walking at 11 months, and that was her Mercury return. And I was like, oh my
So
God.
cool.
So things like that. I
That's
think,
rad.
I and because I've tried to kind of avoid looking at her chart too deeply. I mean, I've already looked at it, and I got a good
You have
sense
to
of.
look. You can't not
Ye
look. I mean, come
like,
on.
right when she came out of the womb, I was already looking, like I was like, "You got the time?" And, like, I looked it
Yeah,
up on
yeah,
my
yeah,
phone right
yeah.
away. Yeah, so I mean, I knew her ascendant right off the bat, I was like, "Okay, I'm ready for this," and, yeah, and I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I've been pretty mindful of not projecting, like, fears or concerns, and it kind of ties into, like, what you started to touch upon around, like, the magic or
Mm,
astral magic and remediation, because this is something that I think it could be like its own episode, because or a
yeah.
whole other conversation, because so within, like, traditional astrology, especially if you're like a Hellenistic astrologer or an ancient utilizing the ancient astrological techniques, people
Mm,
tend to what I've noticed is people tend to emphasize on, like, stoicism, and
mm,
I mean, I studied with Chris Brennan, and so he approaches Hellenistic astrology from a very stoic perspective and teaches using valence, and it obviously covers, other astrologers, but I think Valens and Ptolemy were actually the only two Stoics, and most others were
mm.
Neoplatonic, and that's an area that
Fascinating.
I would love to, like, talk more about, but that's like it's a whole other discussion. And the Stoics were very much amor fati, love your fate, like you can't really alter it, like, and
Mhm,
whereas the neo Platonic astrologers were like, well, there's theurgy, there's, you can do astral devotional practices, you can do deity devotional practices. You have the Agathos Daemon. If you petition your Agathos Daemon, there's, like, in the PGM, and in some of, like, Porphyry, and Iamblichus talks a little bit about it, but Iamblichus believes a lot about how you don't even need, like, astrology to overcome your fate, where he points out that it's really good to understand yourself, but you're not bound to it. And then Porphyry,
mhm,
and others talk about how, you can actually petition and work with your Agathos Daemon,
mhm,
your noble spirit, and
mhm,
have them lift up the
mm,
malefic influences and the malefic destiny, right?
mm.
And so that's, like, kind of like an area that is, like, for people that are debating fate versus free will, very early on we see these debates, and great sages and thinkers were talking about this. It's really not as set in stone. The stars themselves are not set in stone. They're moving, even the fixed stars, and so I'm very much a proponent of that, of applying remediation techniques, whether it's through devotional practices, ritual, or talismanic
Absolutely.
implementation. Yeah, so I feel like, yeah, there's
I
the
mean, yeah, I mean, look, these are all I love this. I love this conversation. It's fantastic. And I agree. And to a certain extent, I also because of the different folk magic traditions that I am studying under currently and otherwise, some
yeah,
of that they also a lot of them talk about like leave the kids alone. You know what I mean? Like leave
yeah,
them alone to like do what they do. And that,
Yeah.
actually within the magical context, and this is one of the questions, like when is too young to start talking to your child about astrology and otherwise? Well, let's start talking about nature, because that is astrology, because
Yeah.
astrology is the unfolding of the potential of all of life and all of nature.
Yeah.
So let's get animistic. Let's get into nature. Let's go out like what J.M. Hamadeh, helped to inspire in me personally, get out and like look at the freaking sky, you know what I mean? And feel the awe of it all. And then you can begin to introduce these really beautiful different archetypes. My daughter loves knowing that she's ruled by Saturn, but she also loves that she's very Venusian. Do you know what I mean? And I can talk about Venus and, talk about when she's drawing something, oh, we're doing this for Venus and we can do, and this is her app. We can begin to put these ideas, and then they can begin with their wonderful imaginations. They can show us in ways that we could never even think of the significations, because they're going to teach us. My daughter has taught me more about Saturn, than like my Saturn returned it. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like,
Yeah.
there is, we get this beautiful education, and then you get into the other rabbit hole, which is synastry, and you start putting like parents charts with their kids charts, and the synastry is always like out of this world. It's like, if so, there is that sense of fate. And so when I create talismanic material, when I do different magical workings within my own home, what I'm really doing is it's for my daughter and my husband, but I'll do like peaceful home workings, protection workings. I will do, and then yes, maybe some remediation. I have a beautiful solar talisman for my daughter,
Mhm.
that is from Sphere and Sundry, that like I would use. Do you know what I mean? Like I will
Mm.
100% put a little bit on that on my daughter's head for her first day of school. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
she can kind of have a little bit more. So I think this stuff is great, but like, within the daimon and her discovering that, how can I help to facilitate that? But that, so she does that totally on her own, because that's where the real magic is, right? Anything I have to
Mm.
give her will not be as good as
Mm.
the actual unfolding of that astrological potential.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good point because sometimes you just have to let life happen. And then astrology is really good in this kind of retrospective
It is. The
lens.
best predictive astrology is in retrospect. It's like, duh, Catherine, of course, right? I mean, like, it's kind of an anomaly to say that, but it is true. And children repeat themselves. Children are
Mm.
through a repetitious process as they learn things. So you have a special window in that early years, that as you see those things pop up, even if you're looking in retrospect, you can go, oh, when the
Mhm.
moon is when the moon's in Libra, oh, that's very interesting. Oh, whoa, that's very, oh, when it's in this house, oh, okay. Because it's going to go back. The kid is developing, so
Yeah.
you have that opportunity too.
Yeah, especially when we're looking at like secondary progressions and
Oh,
yeah, and that can be like a whole other episode that we do on secondary progressions in children's charts because they're, especially for covering like, certain placements, like, if your child's born with Mercury retrograde or you yourself are born with Mercury retrograde, then looking to see when it stations direct is, one
100%.
example. When
I mean, I have a
when
living
planets change
example.
signs. Yeah.
Yes, I have a
Yeah.
living example right now with my stepdaughter, which is another interesting. See, the topics just never end, right? Dear God. But with stepchildren, with my stepdaughter who is graduating from college next year, amazing singer, amazing. Her Mercury is coming out from under the beams. It's becoming
Mm.
visible, it is being, reborn. And,
There you go.
she's in a
Yeah.
position where she asked me, she said, should I try and go for this more mercurial thing, or should I go in this direction? And I was like, honestly, you should go in that direction because of astrology, and I
Yeah.
believe in it. I believe in it. I believe that what I'm telling her is really sound astrological advice, that will enhance her
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. And I definitely want to talk more about that in a future episode with parents of teenagers and young adults, because that is like a whole other whole other game. And yeah, I think all of that is like really important. Like we go to like Abu Mashar, for example,
Mhm.
um, and I think you brought up some quotes like Bonatti's quotes. Yeah, and this goes to like um, Bonatti's like talking about, you know, in our own nativities, the significations of children, and then Abu Mashar says for the child in the nativity of a child, the moon in the nativity of a child, if well placed in a fruitful sign and aspected by Venus, indicates a child beloved by the mother and likely to be healthy. If the moon is afflicted by Saturn, the child may face early sickness or separation from the parents. So this is like, you know, one of those quotes or references that we may find in the traditional texts that can bring anxiety to parents who have, say, the latter configuration,
Yeah,
right?
like me, you know. I think I'm a pretty good mom. No, I feel defensive now. No, 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 no,
Do
no.
you love your child really? You know, and I've seen people who like post things on, and this is like back in the Twitter days. Um, but I have a lot of people blocked now that would do that. And but you know, basically like you know, just talk about these delineations that come from like the medieval tradition, you know, and not really provide like a nuance or even include the ethical considerations like what are you what's the intent behind posting such a thing on social media, you know? um
100%, 100%.
because I think also you know, and this kind of goes back to the kind of the remediation aspect, like you know Demetra George has done a lot of research around the 12th house and in terms of like making amulets based off of like the third decan from the ascendant degree, you know, which is going
Mm,
into the 12th house.
mhm,
And so
mm.
the deities of that decan, you know, you should make like this amulet. She's done a lot of research on it and has presented a few
That's
times.
cool.
And I think you can buy that lecture from her website. Um, but basically the idea that ancient peoples had this understanding of, you know, okay, so you're born with this and then we check to see what's happening in the 12th house or the third decan from the ascendant, and then having an amulet made to ward against particular illnesses that might be associated with that decan, right? And so
Mm,
it's kind of,
mm.
you know, this is, you know, not to throw this out there for people to start like trying to like do it on their own, because I think with um uh prescriptions like that, we definitely need more information before we
Well, that would be
jump into them.
unethical, wouldn't it now? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
but
definitely,
but I bring, yeah, I
definitely.
bring it up in the context of like there you know the things are so like dire, you know.
Yeah,
um
yeah, no,
yeah,
no. Definitely.
and
I
maybe we can talk more of, well, I mean, I'm gonna let you say what you want to say, but I wanted to just say also we can go into more, explore more into that topic when we talk about the 12th house, you know, like in a future episode. I definitely want to
Yep, that's a
cover,
whole thing.
that's a whole other
That's a whole
conversation.
situation over here. No, I'm joking. Yeah, no, I mean, look, I really I really do like to at least attempt to contextualize too historically, especially when
Yeah.
we're looking at parental or child things and these sort of prescriptive things, which, you know, I mean, they do play out in different ways, but we have to understand what that really, you know, might or might not mean. You know, sickness doesn't necessarily mean the child's going to die in our conception of it
Hmm.
today. Again, that could
Yeah.
be like my child might have been thought of as sick, or I might have even been thought of as sick because I just was a very highly sensitive child. Do you know what I mean? Or I have different things, or
Yeah.
my thrum might be a little bit different, you know? And I think there is a flavor of that with the 12th house. And, you know, moon, you know, because of being a Uranian astrologer, my conceptions around hard aspects really do take on more of a the way that I often have it play out or see it play out because of that Uranian element is that it's active, it's action, you know. We're in Uranian astrology, we look only at the hard aspects, and that will include the sesquiquadrate and the semi-square, you know, and so though anything that's within that eighth harmonic, which is going to be the hard aspects. And that when I think about that, I'm like, well, it's action oriented. It's going to change something about you. It's going to cause a shift. Something's going to be going on here. Do you know what I mean? And it's loud. It doesn't necessarily for me mean good or bad. And that's one thing when I'm reading charts, and especially kids charts with a parent, I'm really trying to get that across to people. Astrology is the unfolding of the entirety of life. That's going to include all the good, all the bad. It's going to include freaking life in all its reiterations. It all belongs somewhere in the chart, you know what I mean? And so because of that, we want to throw that out when we're looking more at, okay, maybe my child thrums with their moon. Maybe my child's more cerebral about the way that it wants to be loved. Maybe I want to like hold and snuggle, but my child doesn't want that as much and wants more time alone. Do you see what I mean? And we can begin to
Yeah.
accept, you know, the chart can be used to accept your child as much as project
Yeah.
onto your child, you know? And I think
Yeah.
that's a really powerful thing because acceptance transcends and allows us to have a deep connection, which as a parent, that's pretty much all I'm trying to make happen is a deep connection with my daughter, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for the most part, astrologers or enthusiasts, they tend to have a level of self-awareness. Um,
We hope, right? That would be
Arguably, we could argue about that. But, I think, yeah, and, bringing life the into this earth plane, into this earth realm, I think also brings a level of realization too. And but again, not everybody's the same. And definitely
Mhm.
not speaking in generalized terms, but um yeah, I feel that most parents who are astrologers, they really look at the the nativity and the topics of astrology uh, as I don't know if you heard that. Like, as like, a way to like really deepen our understanding of who this being is that just incarnated, and how do we serve this being, how do we serve them to become their fullest and best potential. And yeah, and I yeah, I think like all the common questions, kind of we're kind of
Mhm.
answering them, spread out in this way. But it's yeah, I really do feel like there, as long as you have like a very even reverent approach to your own child, and therefore
Yeah.
to their astrology, you really can't go wrong. um I would definitely encourage people to not become too obsessed with their child's astrology, and I've seen astrologers who really, they don't even look at it, and then they'll wait until the child's grown and they're like, oh, this makes sense now. And I feel like I have for the most part done that, though I try to keep in mind like some translate, definitely pay attention to my child's lunar returns. Um and like, especially if there's like lunations even that are, like activating certain points. um
Yes. I'm the weird mom that keeps their child home on eclipse days. I'm like, oh, you have a day off.
yeah.
You're not going to school today. You're staying inside with me. And she's like, Mommy, why are all the blinds closed? And why are you like praying and doing like,
Don't look out, don't look out the window.
you know, I'm
Yeah.
like, you know, she's already well versed in, you know, like clearing the space. She loves clearing the space. But
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
y-
it's
uh, y- yeah, and you know, actually, a real fun fact is that, you know, I actually chose my daughter's school. I really was going to go more of a very free form, open, you know, kind of like what would be good for me kind of school, of course, right? That's where
yeah.
we got to check our motives. And when I really looked at my daughter's chart and looked at her Mercury and other things, I was like, oh my gosh, like she probably would be a lot better in a much more disciplined, kind of regimented, routine sort of thing. And I'm like, wow, like, so she's in a much more form, she's much more happy, she's much happier there, which is, again, that's a way that we can, because sometimes my instincts, are based in my instincts and what's going to be, really good for me. I put her in a little theater show. She loves singing. People, if they're watching, they know that I'm a bit much over here, right? Was an actress for a bit too. And, my daughter did her show. She got a solo and everything. She was up there, little Saturn, super Saturn girl. And you could just tell she's like, and afterwards she goes, Mommy, the theater's for you, not for me. I
Yeah.
was like, oh man, little cute 7-year old. But like
Calling you
that's
out. Like,
but like, I mean, this is, because there's also the
yeah.
side where,
So cute.
and you talked about this a lot, that like we really just have to, sometimes we have to back up, we have to back up from our kids too and let them really, don't have too much concern, too much obsession, too much strictness. Those were the things I think you had like mentioned and talked about. And I think
Yeah.
that that's a really, because for me, the process of becoming a mother has been a long process of letting go. It started with her coming out, do you know what I mean, and letting go that way. And then it's just been more and more and more the need to let go. So a lot
Yeah.
around parenting and astrology, I really do think can very much be a way to catapult you. If you feel like you want to obsess about your kids' chart, do the opposite. Maybe take a closer look at your chart. Where can you remediate, And that could be another
Yeah.
episode too. How do we really see ourselves and maybe our parenting styles and our blind spots,
Yeah.
within the chart? So
Yeah. Yeah. We should definitely record a conversation around how we see ourselves and our relationship to children and our 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 role as parents as seen through the nativity, because there's a lot out there, right? There's a lot in
yep,
the tradition, in the source text, and then from our
absolutely.
experience, right? Yeah. And
Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot of astrologers where I'm not any kind of expert over here on parenting and astrology. So there's a lot. I mean, it's going to be exciting to open up that conversation to a lot of other really amazing parents and astrologers too.
yeah. And this, speaking of theater, it's funny because, my daughter was born with like um the moon in Leo culminating on the MC. So maybe I should send her to spend summer camp with you.
I
Like
mean, your
her
daughter and I
auntie
have a
in New
little bit of
York.
a similar flavor of a
Yeah,
chart, I
yeah,
mean,
you both
I don't
share
know
a
how
lot of
much you want
similarities.
that. Yeah, in the public, you know what I mean? But we could, I think it sounds pretty dang good to me. I mean, that to me is so expressive, being somebody, a Leo midheaven, that's a very expressive. That kind of to me is like you put a top on that, and what are you going to get? Like, do you know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
like,
it's
for
so funny.
sure.
Like, and then I'll spend time with your daughter because like I feel like I relate with her more. Like
Yeah,
everyone,
we're like this is what's happened, just like
and
within the synastry of the chart, right? I mean, you can't
the
make this.
gods, the ancestors, they know what to give us to balance us out, right? Because
Well, that's what
it's
I was gonna say.
like
Yes.
yeah, I have like my son is in the 11th house, so it's very like noticeable position, and people notice me. I stick out in a crowd, like I've been told, like and but I'm very like introvert. I'm just like, no, don't see me, And I remember being in high school, and my one of my best friends. We used to play this game where we would kind of sit in the middle of the there would be like a the terraces and the classrooms, and then there would be like this lawn in between. We would go into that space and just sit and pretend to meditate, and just but be like invoking this mantra of like, I am invisible, I am invisible, I am invisible. And like nobody would look at us. I know we thought we were doing
Wow, yeah,
magic,
you were already harnessing it. You're like spell casting right away. You're
we
like, I
were
got
like,
this shit.
nobody can see us, we're gonna skip class now. But um yeah, and I have my MC, is it's like the sun is culminating on the MC. I should be more publicly visible, but you know, I've been involved in the theater too, but behind the scenes, like as a stagehand and techie and sound engineer, so it's so funny because it's like,
Yes.
you know,
I
yeah.
know. I know. It's just wild. And I'm excited for
My
the
daughter loves
12th
to,
house because I have a lot of things to say, too.
yeah.
I think a lot of, Christine Skinner does really interesting information around the 12th house in terms of it being a place of media, which I think makes a lot of
Mm.
sense.
Oh, interesting. I'd
But
like to read more
that
about that.
again, we could just ramble out in like, all sorts of
We'll have to
different
do that on
ways.
the 12th house episode. Yeah. And then okay, so like before, we go off on too many tangents. Yeah, because I was saying all that because like my daughter is actually like she loves to perform.
Yeah.
It's like she's born for this and she just loves dance. She makes up songs now and she's only 4 now, and so I'm definitely lining her up to like go take art classes and or music classes and all of that. She's very excited
Yeah.
about that. Like she's already started playing some instruments at home that I have. But yeah, so in that sense, it's like where I feel like, okay, this is where I can nurture her potential because I see this in her nativity. And so these are the areas, the strong suits that, I can definitely nurture. There's some configurations, where I'm like, oh, like how's that going to play out? And then my response to that, so her being Mars ruled, and is to have her to discover ways to channel her martial energy. So introduce her to karate, shotokan. So I want her to know that she can practice martial arts, and she's really into that. Um, so I think
I love that.
those are like some ways that we can kind of like support our children that are maybe Mars ruled, and even it's like
Yeah.
Saturn ruled, like like you're mentioning your daughter, Saturnian children, and I'm very Saturnian too. I was a very serious kid. I'm very Mercury ruled. Like Mercury is the strongest planet, so I can be very mischievous, but I'm also like very much into studying, and so coupled with Saturn, I was just like a very serious student and like a big nerd, and I'm still a big nerd, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, I ended up channeling a lot of it creatively as well. But I think and I think you mentioned this too with like your daughter, which reminded me because like I was in the math science engineering track. I was always really good at mathematics. I was the kid in school that everybody went to, like, hey, can you help me understand this, and like I love math, like, and so I was going on this math science engineering track in middle school and the beginning of high school, and then I switched to IBAP and art, and because I have a mutable MC, so is how I could best describe
Oh
that.
yeah. And then yeah. And then that's the part you get, that's just the cool thing about astrology. You just get so deep into that nuance. You can see the things that like keep unfolding and like,
Mm.
yeah, no, I mean, we both have malefically ruled children, which is hilarious too. And I also think even
Yeah.
like there could even just be things as simple. Like that's the thing with reading child's charts for me and my experience with it. You can also really simplify like, if it's a ruled kid, this is a faster paced child. This is a child
Mm.
that is going to be on the move. They're going to want to move. They're going
Yeah.
to want to go. They're going to want to get out. They're going to probably be more likely to explore, and they're probably going to be more likely to be the kid that like isn't that scared. Like just they
Yeah.
straight into the ocean and they just keep running in the ocean. Whereas if you have a Saturnian child, you
True
need to
story.
maybe adjust to the fact that the child will actually move slower than the normal. You know what
Or
I
at
mean?
least more deliberately and
Yes, because children are
methodically. Yeah.
exactly. And so like, my daughter needed like, she was one of the, I was one of those kids. It was like, it's time to go, it's like, finally, let's go. Do you know what I mean? Where, and I'm,
Yeah.
and Mars real chill. And like my daughter, she needs like the timer. Hello, you got 5 minutes. Okay, now you got 3 minutes. Okay, now you got like an annoying 1 minute, like you're ready to go Saturn or what, So it's like,
Never wants to leave the
so-
library or
exactly.
the
And then
lab.
remediatively wise, we're also thinking about hot and cold, right? We're
Mhm.
thinking about like, well, with the Saturn, then that Saturn needs to get out more, does need to be
Mm.
forced to do things, even get out of the book, let's go out. You know what I mean? I mean, I think of you like that. I'm like, if anybody knows how to research, it's, like she's got it. Like she, research all the little things. You always have all the quotes. I did a reading with you and I was like, where did you come up with all this crap? You know what I mean? You're just reading like astrological texts, like, and then sure enough, I find out you are reading astrological texts at like 1 a.m. You know what I mean? So it's like, but again, that's that plotting Saturn too. When my daughter commits to something, she's in it, whereas
Yeah.
me, it's like, well, what the fuck is that Mars person doing now? Oh, she's past that, she's on to something else. And that was something that my mom got right, is
Mm.
that she put me in. What she did was, and the intention was, my daughter's driving me nuts and she has way too much energy and I don't know what to do with her. So I'm just going to throw her in a million different activities and see which ones stick. And that really was like amazing, because
Yeah.
I landed on like that I could really dive into, and enjoy. And that's that other side. I give into my Saturnian daughter way too much because the biggest thing I think of with that I do want to teach her is resilience. I think resilience is a very big Saturnian word.
Yeah.
And then with Mars, it's, being enough.
Uh-oh. Freezing.
Being enough, letting it be enough. You don't have to move. I'm freezing. And that's a
Yeah.
sign.
I'm like, Hermes, please
Well, that's
chill.
probably the sign. Yeah, that's probably the sign. But basically, all I was saying was Saturn teaching that resilience and the Mars kind of enough exactly as you are, So
Yeah.
I don't know if you got that, but whatever, who cares?
I think it glitched
Mhm.
out, but it could be a good segue to just kind of go into like, we're kind of like presenting some, you know, um some tips, some advice, and that kind of goes into, how do I, choose an astrologer to read my child's natal chart. You might have an astrologer that you already work with, that you're very familiar with, that has done your own chart, so that would be like the natural, go to. Um, and I know some people who, they try to work with as many different people, um to get a better sense of like different techniques, different styles. And I think especially like if you're a student astrologer, or aspiring to become a professional astrologer, it's really good to get a number of different readings, to get a sense for how other astrologers do it. And so, but I have some criteria for selecting people to work with personally for myself, and so therefore, who would work with my child. Um, and I think they can be very simple. It's, is the person compassionate? If they're on social media, are they, compassionate with others, or are they starting drama all the time? Because there are astrologers that I have worked with in the past who have used, things in my nativity and then start talking shit about that. Like, it's like, and so that's why they're blocked now. But, so you got to really be paying attention to, you know, um, what people are
Mhm.
saying, on social media, because that can really tell you a lot about their character. Um, and there's astrologers that really like them, probably like, the most prolific, or maybe like the busiest, they're not really active as much. There are astrologers, I'm not that shouldn't be a gauge as to like how good of an astrologer you are. Is like,
Mm.
if you're not active on social media doesn't mean that you're not good at astrology, or like, there's quite a number of seasoned astrologers that it's the because of generational differences, or because they're working on certain projects. um so, but if they are, I think it's a really good way to filter out and get a sense of like this person's character and personality. um I think also, the level of skill, like, or even the area of expertise, right? If you're someone that is more inclined to like the modern techniques, obviously you want an astrologer that's going to be versed in modern interpretive techniques, and which is typically like psychological, or even like Uranian astrology or evolutionary astrology, right? So like,
Mhm.
going to um someone who comes like well recommended, and checking out their testimonials, and or if you are wanting more traditional astrology, then obviously checking
Mhm.
out them in that way as well. um so yeah, and then you could go into like deeper details if they're open about like some of their placements, to see like if you have like some sort of synastry with the astrologer. um I think that was, for me, like in terms of like studying with certain teachers, like when I like learned that, oh, we share these placements, and I'm more inclined to like wanting to learn from them. I feel like we'll have a
Mhm.
similar learning or teaching style. So that's been
Yeah.
something that I
And
think that,
you'll be able to receive it too, you know? I mean, if you have
yeah.
similar Mercury placements, you're going at the same vibe, you're going at the same speed as someone, you're doing different things. And Mercury's not all just output, it's input too. You're trying to learn something. You need to, also be able to process it as it comes in. I totally agree with you. I think choosing an astrologer can be a tough thing,
Mhm.
because it feels like things are oversaturated. They're not. Everyone, we should let that go. They're not. Actually, we want more astrology. I've always been like
Yeah.
this, I'm like, the more quality astrology that there is out there, the better, And astrology is very, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, very artistic. And, the individual that you're going to get, like you said, will have their specific thing. So I think you laid that out like really, really beautifully. And like you said in the beginning, hopefully it's somebody that is a part of one of these organizations or is active
Yeah.
in some way or is seeking, do you know what I mean? Because we don't necessarily in astrology have this very defined code of ethics like you and I had with becoming New York State licensed massage therapists, but
Yeah.
there are people that have worked very hard in these organizations that have been around for a long time and that are trying to sow the seeds to get us
Yeah.
to that place. And if you think about even just massage therapy, one of the biggest things they say is don't diagnose, which is very much like that predictive
Yeah.
kind of work. But also within massage therapy, you have to train extra to work on a child, because
Yeah.
obviously there's stuff around touch. But irregardless, when we start going into pediatric, kind of places, we want an extra eye, on who we
Consent.
have. Yes. And
Consent is a big thing, and that is something that we didn't really touch upon, but that is like a big part of like, it's like there's like, it's almost like you're, as a guardian, you are the consent determinant, or the consent provider,
yeah.
and until a certain age. But even I think, once the child becomes maybe, 7 or 8, like that, I think they have like, they have a they definitely have a way to balance judgment, or if they're not comfortable, they're going to let you know. And I think that is like very important. It's like that. I don't think it's fair, like if you say to your child, oh, we're going to go get your chart read by this astrologer together, when they're 7, and they say, no, I don't want to. You can't overrule that. I mean, that's from my ethical standpoint. I would be like, okay, well, but yeah, so
Yeah, I mean, I think seven's too young. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to fill, my daughter's 7, so I'm thinking about it, but like,
Yeah,
you don't want to fill a child's head with too much. I think a lot of
yeah,
what we're landing on is that, I do introduce concepts, archetypes, ideas to my daughter,
yeah,
spirituality with most of the emphasis being upon the connection with nature,
yeah. The
and
plants.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
I
I
like to
did
talk
this.
about like this,
Yes,
that plants, like we have a lot of mint growing around, like wild mint, and I'm like, that's Mercury plant, and things like that.
exactly, and why and
Roses
how
and
it
Venus.
smells, and
Yeah.
yeah, I did a really cool. I was on Amanda Marino. She's a evolutionary astrologer. I was on her Patreon for a hot minute, and she was doing this really cool. I loved this concept that she did, which was that we explored the zodiac, the basic zodiac, but you chose like one plant
Mm.
and flower within where you live, and then you followed it with the zodiac.
Oh,
And
cool. Yeah.
I loved that. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm.
I do that with Dahlia. Do you know what I mean? But we do that with a lot of things, not just one, and
Yeah.
we do that kind of thing. But I think if you fill your child's head with too much info, I mean, I think about some of the deep conversations I
Yeah.
have with Dahlia, and she's just kind of like, Mom, like, I'm trying to watch my show here, Like
Yeah.
she's like, I don't know, you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, okay, okay, not there yet. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
she's just thinking about like when snack, when do I get to have a snack, but yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that you need to hold that astrologer to a bit of a higher standard. And I agree with you. Social media is a very tough thing for a lot of different people to swallow and handle right now, and some people love it, but it
Yeah.
does provide you at least an insight into like who this person is. Are they coming from? Do I think that they'll have my best interest at heart, within as a
Yeah.
consultation or a therapist in some kind of respect?
And I think a good way to test that too is by getting reading from
Getting the
them,
reading.
right?
Yep.
Getting
Yep.
your chart done. That way you can get a sense for like how they will handle, reading your child's chart, and
Yeah.
I think too, like if your child's like really young, and you just want to get it read or have another perspective, you know, on it. The child doesn't necessarily have to be there, and you're
Oh,
having the astrologer, read the chart for you, or provide some extra insight. Um, yeah, and then
I'm pro reading the child's chart,
yeah,
within a set of ethics and guidelines, because again, I do think that astrology is an incredibly underused tool, and
yeah,
that's one of the
definitely,
biggest things that, God, it can actually reveal so much for us and be so helpful. So don't just disregard it just
yeah,
because, the problem is that as parents, we can't get the distance easily, So
mm,
there needs to be that individual that can help to kind of like, whoa, we don't need to like get so intense, We can just look at
yeah,
these couple little things that'll really help you. And I was thinking about this too. I mean, early childhood with your kid, it's survival, So
mm,
most people, when they're coming in again for their child, it is because there's something in particular that they are looking to understand,
yeah,
And I
yeah,
do think that the astrologer, with the right ethics, the right language, the right limitations and understandings and boundaries, can really help a parent accept and
yeah.
understand their kid.
Yeah, definitely. Like especially like around learning habits, or even, developmental turning points, or what are they called?
Or
Milestones,
milestones. Yep.
reaching developmental milestones. Because I think I've noticed a lot of concern around that with some parents. Like I feel like I've been very blessed with my child. Like, she's pretty agile and very quick and everything. But I know that this is a concern for a lot of people, especially like, um, in in societies that maybe are under a lot of stress, political stress, right? I think that also plays a part in how you bring up a child. Um, the issue around, trauma, being trauma informed, and how intergenerational traumas can play out. And then, so then how do we work with that in the nativity of your new child? And I really think that, that ties into, looking at the strengths, like understanding where there are challenges or potential challenges, and then being able to work with the strengths, and then, and even working with those challenges in a way that is empowering, instead of like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And something, a thin line that I always walk and that I'm still very much trying to figure out as an astrologer. I do tend to be more on the positive. I do tend to give out more positive messaging or to try to look at the potential. And I don't, I also come from a training and a lineage where I was literally like taught to say good and bad. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
definitely like, I can see the different things. But I also, part of the reason why I do err on the side of that is because some of those suggestions can be just as powerful, like
Yeah.
if it's just a matter of, really reading the language of the chart, the,
Yeah.
the language is already all there. It's all already within the placements and what they're doing, and being able to unravel that and then going with an astrologer that has a wide range of training and a lot going on, because then with especially children, maybe the stellar aspects are the things that really should be thought about, that really give that
Mhm.
extra umph to make you go, ooh, I'm excited. Do you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
maybe it's the natal placements, or maybe it's the Uranian things, or maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But again, like I
Yeah.
was saying, people are going to come for the problems, so again, it can also
Right.
just be, well, let's see how might they be trying to fit the square peg into the round hole. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want how much of this is my desires and my motivations and me not just taking the child as the child might be. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And we
Yeah.
can't necessarily solve everything. Some of it
Right.
is not meant to be solved because it
Yeah.
creates resilience, it creates integrity. We can't shield our child from the pain that is inherent within the world, and
Yeah.
actually there has to be some level of attunement to it so there can be compassion so that maybe we change some of that,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. That's a
yeah.
really good point. Yeah. Yeah. I guess yeah, definitely. I think that's like a very, 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 very important point. That we can't shield our children from everything. Um, and I'm feeling like the questions that might come up for some parents who maybe have um, children with disabilities, um, or chronic illnesses, or just going through some sort of acute illness at the time, and working with that, and I think like the ethics around that, it would be, it's basically, doing a reading for an adult that it has similar experiences, but hoping that the astrologer is very mindful of that, and um mindful enough to be aware of it and honest about that, and instead of like sugarcoating everything, but
Yeah.
then, bringing in some sort of support,
Yeah.
through either,
Yeah. Like, can you really meet someone where they're at? Can you really
yeah,
meet them where they're at? And within that, meeting them where they're at, where can you find the joy or the healing?
yeah,
Maybe that person, that might be reading for somebody who is, terminally ill,
mm,
God, I hope not, but reading for somebody that is going through that. Maybe you're just looking at that fifth house. What do they want to play? What do they want to play?
yeah,
Where's the joy? Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
also too, again, the ethics of does it need to be read? You know what I mean? Because
Mm,
I have certainly had people show up and for
yeah.
readings about different things, and I've said to them, I don't think astrology is like the thing for this. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you know,
Yeah.
I hate to be like that because again, I want astrology to take its rightful place and to be understood and to be proliferated throughout the world, you know. I think it would
Yeah.
just improve everything so much. But at the same time, you also, what really is going to be the best? Sometimes doing the consultation isn't the best idea at that time, right? The astrological point of at that time.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes too, you have to be like, can I really hold space for this? Because there might be an
Yeah.
astrologer out there that is much better tailored than you to work
Hmm.
with somebody like
Hmm.
that, you know? And I
Hmm.
also have sent people to other astrologers depending on their cultural, their ethic,
Yeah.
their backgrounds, and been like, you know, I can't understand part of your life because I haven't lived anything like that. But this
Right.
astrologer has, you know, and that's also a piece to it, which would make me say that you would probably want, if they're reading your chart, you know, not that I don't think that you couldn't be a parent, and I don't want to do that, be in that place. Do you know what I mean? Because I know that can be very touchy for people too with what they've experienced. But ideally, maybe that person has had the experience that you're looking for. You know what I mean? If your child
Yeah.
is older, you know, maybe go to astrologer that has had older children. You get what I'm saying? Because they
Yeah,
have
definitely.
a, it's not that you can't be skilled enough to do it, but it might be something to consider, you know?
Yeah, I think that's another really great point. Just it kind of brings that back to like the level of skill. But yeah, and that's maybe something that I didn't explicitly state, but yeah, ideally the astrologer that we'd be working with would be a parent themselves too, because they'll have that understanding. Though, astrologers that are not necessarily raising children, but they might be a parent in another way,
100%.
like being an
Exactly.
uncle or a niece, so just somehow having an understanding of
A mentorship and
yeah,
understanding, or even
with
again, that
children.
thing that
They could
happens with
even
parents where you
oh,
just get like,
mhm.
you're just on it, you know? And that's why it's so tough reading the charts because it's hard to not really get deep into it, you know?
Yeah. And one another thing that came up when we were talking is the idea of like, for individuals who might have lost a pregnancy or
Oh,
had an early, death, or like, when if their child dies within the first few months. I think sometimes, individuals who have gone through these experiences, they'll want to look at the astrology of those events to kind of make sense, to bring some sort of like, resolution, or at least to process the event. And so that's another area around like, the ethics, when I think, the person coming with the consent, with the interest in looking at it and exploring it, um,
yes.
I think it's a very valuable tool for understanding, what
Yes.
happened, um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I would definitely agree. Again, looking at where you are in your grief process
Mhm.
and how you are responding to that. I have a dear friend that went through that, and I did
Yeah.
pull the chart on the side, and I did pull the child's chart, and it was one of those things that she's very vocal about it too. Like she wants River to
Yeah.
be talked about, she wants the child to be spoken about, she wants to hear about all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So she was in a place that she was really able to have that be something that would be very healing for her, you know?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
know that again, like you said, that comes down to that consent, you know? Astrology is so healing, even just outside of medical astrology. I mean, within my own life, the reason why I dove so deeply into astrology was because aspects of myself that I couldn't accept things about myself where I was constantly trying to make the square peg fit in the round hole. It was like astrology was like, no, no, like, don't you see? This is what you have. This is what you got. You know what I mean? To work with. And then what's so beautiful about it is, like you said, there's always something. Actually, not just something, there's like probably like 20 things that you can do to help remediate that, whether that's through an evolutionary lens, a Uranian lens, a medieval lens, a stellar lens, a lunar mansion lens, a this lens. Yeah, the party that is, astrology and reading the chart, So there's so much there for us as parents. And I think
Yeah.
that, really continuing to dive into this topic with other very well-informed parents and astrologers. I think this is going to be just fantastic, because
Mhm.
I don't know how many conversations around this is happening, because it tends to be it tends to be a subject that people are scared of. And there even is in the astrological community this sort of thought as well. And I shouldn't say astrological community. I've heard, that, like, for example, like some people even just say like no kids charts whatsoever, like no, no,
Yeah.
not until they're 28. You're not even an
Right.
adult until you're 28, and
Yeah,
I would,
there's the first Saturn return people like don't look at anything.
yep, and I mean, what's interesting with the Saturn return, though, at the 28, according to brain science, they do actually say that that's when the brain has fully stopped developing, which I think is
Like
just kind of
25.
fascinating. At 20,
Yeah.
oh, it's not 28, it's 25. I thought it was
Yeah.
28. Okay, misinformation again. Sorry, guys.
I mean, it's like right on the cusp of
Yeah, it's not close
the
enough for
first.
me. That's 3 years away, man. That
Maybe
Saturn's in a different sign at that point. Yeah, no, that can't. That's not going to work.
it's
Um,
the Sadi Sati, in
yeah.
Jyotish, like, but yeah, no, yeah.
But
I mean,
yes,
I think that's like it's in that's its own form of rigidity, and I try to stay away from rigidity of any kind because it's like you can't just not gonna look at it until 28. Like because I think we've been talking about this, there's so many.
you'd be sell yourself short.
Yeah, you can find out a lot about how you can support your child by looking at their astrology, and um I think having like a level head about approaching your child's astrology and even how you're going to introduce them to astrology, in a way that's playful and open to them.
Mhm.
Oh, speaking of the devil.
I know. We'll have to. She's like, come on, it's time to play now, mommy. But on
Vela
that
va a empezar,
note,
va a
on
empezar a
that
votar.
note, I would say, there are some really cute
Je ne sais
astrology
pas.
books out there, things on the zodiac, things like that that could be a little bit like, oh, that's too pop astrology. But for the kid, it's accessible. There's
Yeah.
there's astronomical books on like the different constellations. I mean, you and I, for all we know, I mean, we might need to start writing our book series, right?
Yeah,
Book series,
totally.
right? Right? On, like, you introduce your kid to magic now.
So
So
my stepson, my daughter's oldest brother, uh, we share this same rising sign, and he has Mercury in the first house, and he's like always interested in astrology, asking me about astrology, and so like I got him a telescope. It's like a very simple telescope. Eventually,
love
we're
it.
gonna get a fancier one with the right ascension, declination,
So
adjustments, and everything.
exciting.
And but yeah, like I love pointing out the constellations to him, and then so everybody, all the siblings like to then come out and look at the sky together. And I
Amazing.
think that's like a really simple way, aside from like connecting astrology to like mundane life, like um, I also like to joke a lot about, the zodiac stereotypes are like that's very Gemini of you, or like that's very
Oh yeah,
Scorpio.
definitely,
Like
definitely,
I'm
definitely.
like, you know, my stepson and my daughter have the same moon in Leo, and they're like besties, and then
Mm.
her older sister's Scorpio moon, and we get along very well because we have I have a moon in Cancer, but she's definitely like more reserved. She doesn't want to be out there, um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, being able to like talk about the zodiac like within their own chart and like explain, oh, this is why you love these things,
Yeah.
and yeah, and
Definitely. And sometimes I'll just say to my daughter, I'll just be like, the sun, because she knows that the planets all represent different things. So she'll be like, Mommy, tell me again, what does Venus represent? And I'll be like, oh, well, it's beauty and blah, blah, blah. And so she has little stuffed, she has like all the planets and like little stuffies. And so we'll take
nice,
the
yeah.
stuffies out and I'll actually like act it out a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like for her, like there's so many ways because that isn't that the best part of it too, where you're like getting in tune, you're teaching your child too to get in tune with time, to get in tune with, nature,
Yeah.
to get in tune. And to also like, I just have to teach my daughter sometimes now, like within her school friends and things. I'm like, look, like, it's not that your friend doesn't like suddenly not like you, like they just might be tired. And so there's also that thing, like in my own head, I'm like, and they're probably having a Mars transit. You know what I mean? It's like they're like
Yeah.
the moon's on their Mars today. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
you just start to, and that's another way to begin to sort of because it's one of those things where even though horoscopic astrology is like we're the center of the universe, right? Within our chart and our frozen time, astrology itself is so much more and bigger than that. And understanding how our little bit fits into the bigger bit, do you know what I mean? And the all of that, that's really like comforting, you know what I mean? Like, wow,
Yeah.
I'm a part of the solar system. I am the stuff of stars as they all like put on their mugs and their t-shirts and things. But like that's a very magical thing. And as
Yeah.
you and I both know, magic is not dead and it's not just for our own personal uses. So I think giving
Yeah.
kids some of that is really powerful. And maybe we can get into some of that to kids and magic as well, because there are
Yeah.
some really amazing ways to foster what is intuitively already something that kids are doing,
Yeah.
you know?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I think um everything that we've talked about has been a pretty good starting point at least, and hopefully
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
hopefully it's provided some things to think about and consider. But yeah,
Yeah,
we
and
should
go ahead. Sorry.
oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say like we should probably finish here then, and
I
you
agree.
know,
And I just want to say too, whenever anybody begins to listen to this or hear about this, I'm sure you as well, we would love to hear,
yeah.
what resonated, what didn't resonate. Like I said in the beginning, we're both professional astrologers, but we're not professional parents. We're also still, trying to figure it out, and that's part of the conversation. So letting us know or how things have shown up within your kids' charts, your own thoughts. Oh my gosh, would love to hear it so much.
Yeah, definitely. Please let us know any outstanding questions or your comments on what we talked about, your insights, and also if you have topics that you want to talk about. Um, Definitely would love to hear from listeners. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed this inaugural episode and looking forward to talking with more astrologer parents in the future. So yeah, we'll see you next time. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for tuning in. All right, take care, everyone.